Welcome to another edition of the Up Your Assets podcast, hosted by Ray Ferrara, CFP founder and executive chair of Provice Management Group, LLC. The following presentation is for general information purposes only and not personalized advice. Seek out a professional before making any financial decisions. Additionally, no guests pay to be on the show or are paid to be on the show, and the opinions expressed are their own and not the host's or the show.
Hello and welcome to another podcast of Up Your Assets. I'm your host, Ray Ferrara, CFP, and I'm the founder and executive chair of Provice Management Group, located in Clearwater and Tampa, Florida. Today, we're going to address the issues about being a retirement plan sponsor. Unfortunately, too many advisors rush in to set up a 401k, 403b, pension and or a profit-sharing plan with a company without explaining all of the obligations and liabilities that come with being a plan sponsor. When was the last time the advisor did an in-depth education session for your employees? Do you have a fiduciary file? When is the last time you reviewed the investment choices and their costs associated with them? More lawsuits are being filed against employers for failing to fulfill these responsibilities as a plan sponsor. To help us today, our guest is John Brethauer, CFP, MBA, and president of Provice Management Group. John has spent almost 15 years providing advice to plan sponsors along with his team at Provice. He's going to help us unravel the trials and tribulations that come with being a plan sponsor. John, welcome to the Up Your Assets podcast.
Thank you, Ray. I'm happy to be here.
John, there are several ways that an advisor can work with an employer, either on a commission or on a fee basis, and then either as just an agent and perhaps on a fiduciary basis. Is there really that much difference between hiring a fiduciary advisor versus a typical financial advisor or consultant?
Ray, I'm glad you asked that. And I'd first preface my statement by saying there's a lot of great advisors and consultants out there that really pride themselves on doing the right thing. But unfortunately, if you're not working with a fiduciary, you're rolling the dice a little bit because those folks that are not acting as a fiduciary are not legally bound to act in your best interest. So we always think it's the best practice to hire a fiduciary, someone that is legally bound by law to do what's in the best interest and have that fiduciary obligation to your plan. Unfortunately, when we talk about an agent or an advisor or consultant, they only have to make a suitable investment recommendation. And as we know, there's a lot of things that could be suitable, but when we really drill down to what's in someone's best interest, that sometimes is a different direction. So we certainly think it's very important to look for a fiduciary to work on your plan. And typically, they're going to bring a whole different mindset and fiduciary process to your plan. They're going to be focusing on ways to help optimize your plan design, making sure it's a good fit for both the employer and the employees. They're going to be looking at things like low share class costs per investment. This is easy pickings. We've walked into plans, large plans, $55 million or more, that when we review the fund lineup, we notice, wow, the target dates are in a higher share class than they need to be. So being able to knock 20 basis points off of $15, $20 million before you do any hard work is a great way to start a relationship. But unfortunately for those participants, they were paying too high of fees for too long. Some of the other areas that a fiduciary tends to focus on is making sure there's fee transparency and fee leveling. We want to make sure there's no undue advantage to push investors into other investments or asset classes based on what that's paying the advisor. So we think it's very important to talk about those things like revenue sharing. Revenue sharing was this hidden black box for decades in the retirement plan industry. No one knew exactly what we were paying and who was getting all of that revenue. Luckily, in 2012, the Department of Labor came out with fee disclosure regulations, and that really opened the door to making sure that the plan sponsors and even the service providers know exactly what's being paid and who's actually collecting those dollars. We think that's extremely important so folks know what they're paying for and what they're getting for those services. I think from a regulatory and compliance aspect, those fiduciaries are going to be much more in tune. Why? Because they're taking a greater level of responsibility. Typically, advisors or consultants that just work as a suitable level of care aren't taking legal responsibility or they're not taking that regulatory liability off the plate of those plan sponsors like a fiduciary advisor can.
John, I understand there's two different types of fiduciaries. Explain the difference and which one do you typically use at Provise?
And that's a really good point, and that can be a little confusing. There's two main types of fiduciaries. One is called a 321 fiduciary or a co-fiduciary, and the other one's called a 338 or a fiduciary that has full discretion. Typically at Provise, we are being engaged as a 338 full discretion, and that's because we can reduce the most amount of liability from our plan sponsors. So what this means from a practical standpoint of if we're a co-fiduciary, then my explanation is if we catch a lawsuit, we'll be in the boat together. And you having fiduciary, someone who is an expert in this field and understands all of the regulations, that's a much better place to be than if you're in that boat by yourself, which is where you would be if you weren't working fiduciary. However, if that lawsuit is based on the investments, the performance, fees, and those things of that nature, now if you've engaged a 338 full fiduciary, now you're not even in that boat if you're a plan sponsor. So now you sent that expert on their way to make sure that they're doing all the right things. So it's certainly a high level of care. And I think most plan sponsors want to mitigate as much as their responsibility as they can.
So 338 takes a little bit of the obligation away. Excuse me, a 321 takes a little bit of the obligation away. 338 takes away more. But is it fair to say that the obligation is always there ultimately on the plan sponsor?
Absolutely right. You can never absolve yourself of all of your liability when you're a plan sponsor. You're still in control of those assets. You control when payroll deductions actually get sent to the 401k plans for those investors. So we think that that duty is an ongoing duty and certainly requires constant maintenance of that plan to make sure we're always doing the best thing for our plan participants.
And heard that as long as the investments have a good return, then the owner trustee should be safe from lawsuits since their employees are happy with the plan. Is that a fair statement, or is that just hiding from the inevitability of having some responsibility?
It's certainly the latter, but we sure do hear it a lot within the industries. In many plans that we've taken over, the prior advisors boasted, but we have great returns. Well, what are great returns? The last time that we dug into a plan that supposedly had great returns, great. Their performance was up low double digits, a little over 10, 12%. That would be great, other than the fact that it was 2013 and the markets were up 25+% that year. So it's all relative, and that's why it really gets down to is you have to have a investment process. It's not just about the returns. And yes, our investment process has 11 different criteria, and 3 of them are a pure performance. So we don't want to reduce the impact that good performance has on the plan because it's very important, but there's so many other things to look at. Typically, again, when you're working with that fiduciary, they have a fund process. So they're not just looking at the returns, they're looking at the manager tenure, the size of the plan, making sure that if it comes into some financial strain, you'll still be able to have liquidity. Those investors can move in and out of those funds. One area that investors often overlook is actually the risk within those investments. So part of what that fiduciary advisor should be doing is looking at a risk adjusted performance, making sure we're getting good bang for our buck. And we're not taking exceedingly high levels of risk to just get a marginal increase in return. It brings me back to a story when I was meeting with a CPA firm, a very smart participant. The year before, we were talking, it had been a tough market, and they just weren't comfortable with taking much risk. We talked about how much time they had until retirement and really talking about increasing that equity exposure to help them overcome some of that inflation and get some real return. Because at the time, this person was all in money market. I met with them a year later and they were in 3 funds. Initially, I thought, well, great, this person's finally starting to kind of move that needle until I saw which 3 funds they were. This person put a third in emerging markets, a third in developed international, and a third in small cap growth. So this person was effectively the year before, in their Volvo, in park with the parking brake handle raised. And the next year, they're on a Corvette driving 100 miles an hour with one hand on the wheel. So we know that those investors sometimes overlook the risk that these investments come with. And so that's what we're here to also make sure is that they're not ignoring that part and making sure that they're actually investing in investments that are meet their objectives and are a good fit with their risk tolerance. A couple of those things that we also looked at as well is making sure that all the asset classes are filled. We run into plans where they might not have large cap growth and value broken out. Well, in a day and age where the S&P 500, 35% of it's made up of 7 stocks, if I'm getting close to retirement and I have a big balance in my 401k, I probably want more diversification than having a third of my S&P 500 assets in the Mag 7. So I think when you look at some of those pieces and how impactful they are, you really have to have a nice process. And the flip side is you don't give too many choices. 10, 15 years ago, all the rage was, hey, let's put as many fun options as we can in these plans. It's going to be great diversification. Well, what ended up happening is you have an investor looking at their large cap blend category, and it had 7 choices on which one to choose. Well, a couple of those funds were usually really good. A couple of them were usually okay. And then there's usually a couple that no one should be invested in. Why does that participant need to make that analysis to figure out which fund they should be in? There should be one fund per category, and it should be a great fund every time.
So, John, let's come back to how people are paid. I've often heard people say, "Well, I don't pay anything for all of that advice and for all the other services that are involved. It all's free. Nothing's free." So, help us understand when somebody thinks they're not paying anything. Where are those fees, and where do they come from?
Yeah, Ray, that's a great point. There's been a lot of hidden costs in retirement plans over the years. And even with the Department of Labor coming out and pushing for fee transparency, there are still some ways where participants can't see all those fees. And the easiest place to hide them is in the expense ratio of a mutual fund. So a lot of times you'll see extra costs baked into the expense ratio. So you never see a line item saying I'm paying a fee for my 401k plan. It's just being netted right out of your performance. And the problem with that is people don't know how much they're paying for that. Is that a worthwhile deal? Is it a bad deal? Is it a great deal? Well, you can't tell if it's all lumped together. So we are big believers in transparency and actually delineating what fees are going to the record keeper, going to the advisor, going to the TPA. That way, each service provider can really be looked at on their own merit and making sure they're providing good value to the plan.
John, that really leads into my next question, and that is, how does a plan sponsor ensure that the plan remains competitive moving forward, given all of the things you just talked about?
Sure. Well, in our opinion, we think all plans should be benchmarked on a regular basis. And a lot of times, what a benchmark means to their advisors, oh, let me go get some quotes on your record keeping platform. That's not a true benchmark. All that is kind of seeing which way the wind is blowing for one particular service. We think the real merit in this is to look at all those service providers and see of a plan of equal size, equal number of participants, what are their fees? And not just what are their fees are, but what services are they getting for those fees? So we actually hire a third-party independent company to benchmark all of our plans on a regular basis. That way our hands are not in the analysis part. It gives us the opportunity and the plan sponsors to see how each of their service providers are doing on a cost standpoint, and are we getting more or less than what the benchmark is for that plan. So we can see, okay, we might be okay with a record keeper that is maybe doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but the costs are below average. Okay, maybe we're comfortable with that. But what we're probably not comfortable with is having a record keeping platform that doesn't have any of the bells and whistles, but it's now over what market is for some of these higher level plan structures. We think that's imperative to keeping the plan in a good spot, and it provides leverage to those other to the plan sponsor for their other service providers. For instance, if we're running a benchmarking report and we see that Empower is a little bit higher than they should be, we send them this report and ask for a fee reduction. And most times than not, we get that reduction. So it's a way to ensure that we keep those lower fees going forward. And quite frankly, being on the Up Your Apps podcast, I would be remiss if I didn't say it doesn't help keep our fannies out of the fire, both ourselves and the plan sponsor, because we don't have to have the cheapest plan, but we do have to know what our fees are and if they're reasonable. And this allows us to make sure they're continuing to be reasonable on a go-forward basis.
So, John, a couple of questions around that. Kind of the first is it doesn't have to be the lowest possible cost. It just, as you said, it just has to be reasonable. And you benchmark the plans that Provise is managing on a regular basis. What if I have a plan today and I've never seen a benchmark? Is it possible for you to benchmark my plan and help me reduce my costs?
Absolutely. We can collect all of the data we need based on the investment structure that's in place in the fee disclosure statement that's now required by the DOL. Thank you for doing that, so that we can lift under the hood and look at everything that's going on with that plan. So that is something that we do provide a complimentary review where we will go in detail and we'll look at all the fees, all the funds, and the fiduciary and governance items. We look at that as kind of the three main points when we're digging into a plan, because those are typically the ones that are maybe not where they should be. I mean, as we know, we need to have this running at a high level so that we can attract and retain key employees for a long time.
So, what should plan sponsors be concerned about in the future going forward in this entire retirement plan space?
I think they have to keep an ear out to the governance that's happening. There has been a lot of changes with how these plans are run and the objectives, and having a fiduciary advisor should be that person who helps bring those governance pieces to the plan sponsor. It's a lot to manage your own business. We know that those folks wear a lot of different hats. So we take it upon ourselves to make sure that we're bringing that governance aspect to our clients. And I think with Secure Act 2.0 that came out over the last couple of years, that was over 100 different plan provisions. That is an
Wow.
enormous task for a plan sponsor to look through and say, wait a minute, which one of these are even applicable to me? So we look at those provisions and then tailor which ones we think are important to our clients based on how well we know them and what their objectives are within that plan. And that's one area we work really hard on. We don't want to see anyone going down the path of lawsuits in potential pinstripe jumpsuits.
Well, let's hope not for sure. Are businesses eligible to receive any special tax considerations when starting a new retirement plan?
Yes, that has been one of the great features of Secure Act 2.0 is a big push to get more plans out for employees. Right now, if you're in some of these smaller businesses, you may not have a retirement plan. The cost of them is just greater for these small businesses. So this was Department of Labor's idea to really try to get more coverage to these participants. And I think it was a wonderful benefit. So actually, you can receive tax credits for the first 5 years if you're starting a new plan. So it can put money to help cover your startup cost. You can get extra money for if you're doing auto enrollment, meaning that participants will get enrolled into the plan every single year, kind of like how our medical benefits work, trying to get them more on this is the way we should move forward and not an option to opt out of it. And it can even go towards the contributions, which is usually the most expensive part of a retirement plan is those employer contributions. In the first year, depending on the makeup of your business, you can receive over $55,000 if you are establishing a new plan as of now.
Well, that's quite a bit to help you get started. John, entrepreneurs typically and especially in the early years, pour most everything they have back into their business to help grow that business. And often they feel there's a need to catch up later in their life on their retirement savings. Is there anything special that a firm with good cash flow can do to help that business owner catch up?
There sure is, right? And we get this a lot. Just as you mentioned, these business owners have poured everything they had and now they're in catch up mode. So the easiest thing, and one that most people don't realize they already have if you have a 401k plan, is you probably have a component called a profit sharing plan built right into that 401k plan that does allow some extra employer contributions. And of course, when you're working under the 401k and DOL, they can't be discriminatory. So you have to make sure that it's fair to all, but that doesn't mean you have to give an equal contribution to everyone. So a lot of these profit sharing plans, you can actually create formulas that will benefit the owners and key employees a little bit more than the rest of your group. So this allows you to maybe add a component so that you can increase um, your retirement savings. And if you really want to get into super funding, looking at a cash balance or defined benefit plan is a really tremendous way to catch up quickly. It's not unusual to be able to put in $200,000 to $300,000 a year of tax deferred income when you have a 401k, profit share, and cash balance plan combination. These types of combo plans are really changing the way these business owners retire because it allows them to catch up and make up for some of those lost years that maybe they weren't contributing to their retirement as they should have. In addition, we also run across maybe nonprofits or larger companies that have these executives they really want to take care of and they want to make sure that they keep for a very long time. And so they might use a non-qualified plan to target that person and make sure that they can keep them for their whole career and give them some great incentive to stay with the business. That's another area that we're seeing a lot into. And again, we're in the age of baby boomers getting closer to retirement. Not all have done their due diligence on savings as much as they should. And so these extra components really help propel them to get back on track.
John, you've talked about benchmarking a couple of different times. Many employers, I hear, don't really benchmark at all. What's the urgency in getting a benchmark? What's the benefit other than kind of just checking in? Or is it just a box I check off?
Question, right? I don't think many people are aware, but if you are the trustee of a plan, you're on the investment committee or a plan sponsor, not only are you professionally liable, but you're actually personally liable as well. So I think the urgency is to make sure that you don't not holding yourself out with some potential liability there. And most people don't realize how much weight that carries in that retirement plan space. So we think it's imperative to benchmark these plans on a regular basis. The Department of Labor has actually come out in a white letter ruling and said, if you're benchmarking your plan every 3 years, it's going to be very difficult to ever catch a lawsuit regarding fee issues with your plan. So we think it's a great way to shield you from any of that potential liability that may be coming. And guess what? 10 years ago, auditors were not coming down to these smaller markets. You had to have $100 million plans. Well, times have changed. They are coming down to smaller markets now. Someone that's the plan sponsor for a $10 million plan may now find themselves on the radar sooner rather than later. And I know if I carry or any business owner carries enough liability as it is, why would we wait in order to shield us from this liability?
John, given all the things that you've talked about, whether a person is working on commission, working for fees as a fiduciary, non-fiduciary, what are the costs of the mutual funds, who's getting paid what? How does someone even get started to know whether their plan needs improvement?
Yeah, right. Typically, we would encourage them to talk to a local fiduciary advisor, someone that really knows the industry, has a lot of expertise, and can help uncover these issues. We would typically approach that and go through our benchmarking report. I think that's the best way to really look under the hood and see all the moving parts. I think that all advisors have a different approach. This is something we like to provide a complimentary review on. We're a big believer in education. And at the end of the day, we may not retain that plan, but if we can give them good advice and help them put their plan in a better position where their participants are now in a better position for retirement, then we did a really good thing and we can live with that. But I would just encourage them to take that first step, find a fiduciary advisor, and allow them to do an analysis on your plan. And that will be a good first step onto enhancing your plan for a long time to come.
John covered a lot of territory today for plan sponsors to consider exactly what's going on with their plans. I want to thank you for being on the Up Your Assets podcast, and glad and proud of the work that Provise is doing to help plan sponsors improve the plan on behalf of their participants. And usually the biggest participant is the owner of the business. So usually he or she is the one that's going to benefit the most by reducing those costs and making sure that the funds are the best funds that they can have. Thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to having you again.
Thank you, Ray. It's a pleasure.